Good afternoon. The purpose of this video is to explain the 5 things that I think are important to consider when purchasing a rental or investment property. Anyone who's ever thought about buying an investment property probably quickly realized that there's a lot more that you need to consider than you would if you were just buying a house that was going to be your primary residence. There's especially a lot more that you should consider if you're hoping for that to be a sound investment as a rental property. Now, I should give you my disclaimer. These aren't the only 5 things I'm saying that need to be thought about. Everyone has a different personal situation, different financial situation, different types of rental properties and investment properties will have different considerations that you'll need to take into account. But, as someone who's owned multiple rental properties going back about a decade or so, and having learned a lot along the way, I can say fairly confidently, if you can figure out these 5 things, get these 5 things right, that you're going to have a really good shot at being a successful investment property owner. The last thing I want to call out is that my experience is really in properties with a format of 1 to 3 units, like 2 flats, 3 flats, single family homes. So that's specifically the target market that I'll be speaking to. Okay, so what are the top 5 things to consider when purchasing a rental property? I decided I was going to list them here right up front because I know this video is kind of long, so if you feel that you understand one area better than others and you want to skip ahead, they are going to be covered in this chronological order, so feel free to do so. So the first thing to consider is the spread. When I say spread, that's my own kind of term around what is the potential income opportunity when you look at what you think you can get in rent minus what your costs of mortgage, taxes, and insurance will be. That's obviously very important to have a positive spread, so we'll talk a little bit about how you estimate that. The second important thing to consider is the effect of appreciation and taxes on the value of your rental property or your investment. Appreciation can vary widely by neighborhoods and cities and states, and taxes do change over time, so you need to understand those and try to forecast what that might due to the quality of your investment. Then third is to consider how you're going to manage it. Are you going to act as landlord? And what are some of the responsibilities and expectations you can think might pop up there? Or are you going to press the easy button and have a real estate management firm manage it for you, but then understanding what some of the costs of doing that are? So the fourth is understanding the law and how you're going to use that to create a lease. There's a lot of laws around, landlord obligations and treatment of tenants, and it does vary by state. So it is important to understand that you are all taking all the right steps to protect yourself as a investment property owner, and as well as making sure that you have the appropriate lease document that reflects the requirements of the laws in your state. The final thing to consider is going to be, cash flow. So here is where I want to talk a little bit about the considerations around unexpected large expenses that might come up, and particularly the value of holding onto investment properties long terms and the implications of paying down principal and depreciation over time. So those are our 5 things. Let's jump into it. Okay, so let's get going here. The first of the 5 things to consider when purchasing a rental property is understanding the spread. When I talk about the spread, that's just my term for taking what is your rental income potential minus your cost of mortgage, taxes, and insurance. The reason you obviously want to understand that is the more positive a spread, the better investment it is, right? The more money you'll have coming in to help offset, costs of repairs and other things that might pop up. And then if you have money over at the end of the day that you get to pocket. So the way we figure out the spread is first by looking at what the rental income potential is. Now, a lot of times when you're looking at investment properties, they're already being used as investment properties. So they're, for example, you might be looking at a 2-unit building, and if both renters are already living there paying $1,000 a month rent, you should feel pretty confident that $2,000 a month is the income potential. But one thing I always like to tell people is don't just take it at that as the gospel. Validate it yourself. by going home and going on apartments.com or something else, finding that neighborhood. If it's a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, search for exactly that and any other amenities it might have, and see what they're going for. If they're all going for something like $1,000 a month, then you should feel pretty good that is the income potential at this time. But if for some reason the average one's going for $600, you might want to have some concerns that if the people who are renting there now left, that you might not be able to get $1,000 for it again. And then similarly, if you're looking at a building that has no renters, let's say it's a new construction build, or someone used to live in one of the units, which is very common, like it's a 2-flat where they live in one and they have renters in the other and they're moving out, that you can use the same approach of just going to apartments.com or Craigslist or any of those to see what you can get for the unoccupied units. So once you understand your rental income potential, then you got to understand your costs. These days, most banks want to sell you a mortgage that also includes an escrow that pays for your taxes and your insurance. So, pretty easily, if you know the price of the house and what type of mortgage you want, you should be able to get a bank or a mortgage broker to tell you what a monthly payment would be pretty quickly. So let's say in this example where we had 2 units, each one paying $1,000 a month of rent for a $2,000 total income potential, that the mortgage with taxes and insurance was $1,600. So you take your $2,000 of income minus your $1,600 of cost, you got a spread of $400. Obviously, the bigger the spread, the better, because one thing you'll have to think about is that mortgage and those costs aren't going to be the only costs you're going to have. Things are going to break, things are going to go wrong, and what I like to suggest is the better the spread you have, or any spread you have, that you're letting that kind of build up for a while, not just pocketing the money or spending on something else, so that when something does go wrong, you have the funds sitting there to help cover the expenses from that rental property. So there's not really a magic number on what's right, because obviously if you buy a more expensive house, odds are to repair things might be more expensive. You might be able to get away with a smaller spread for less expensive houses, but at the very least, it absolutely needs to be positive. And then after that, the bigger the better. The way I like to look at it is, let's say for example, we have a 2-unit house here in Chicago that last year had some water damage. There was a slow leak behind the hot water heater that wasn't detected right away, and long story short, we had to tear up the entire floor, subfloor, all the way down to the joists, have a professional mold remediators get in there because we got to make sure it's safe for the tenants, and then put it all back together. I think it cost something like $5,000. So in this example, at $400 a month of spread, it's roughly 13 months of spread it costs to handle that one thing. Now that definitely is a more expensive repair than what you should hope to happen on a regular basis, but you have to understand your financial situation, and let's say you had 2 things, just bad luck in a row like that, where you're going to maybe deplete all the spread money you built up. Do you have enough free cash from elsewhere that you can handle covering some of those costs? Or another common one is a tenant leaves and it takes you 2 or 3 months to find a new tenant where you're still having to pay your mortgage, but you're not getting the rental income. So that is, I think, the first thing I always look at, right? We have 5 things we're going to talk about today, but there's no point in understanding the other pieces if you don't feel comfortable with the spread, because if you don't, it's not probably going to be a good investment in the first place. So you can probably just stop your search on that particular house at that right there. Okay, so our second important thing to consider when purchasing a rental property is appreciation and taxes. So, in the first section with understanding the spread, we talked about how your positive spread is something that, we strongly recommend that you let that build up in a bank account so that you can then use it to help offset unexpected costs of repairs or other things. That once you feel pretty comfortable that you have enough cash built up to protect yourself there, that's the first area where you can start to get a positive return on your investment by taking that money and using it for other things in your life. So another way that you're going to get money back on your investment is through appreciation. When I say another way you're going to get it back, it's as if you have a positive appreciation, which is what we're shooting for. So appreciation really is how the value of a house changes over time. It's it'll be partially driven by the house itself and that you keep it maintained and in good quality, but it's also very, very driven by neighborhoods. Certain neighborhoods become on trend because either they opened up new shops or restaurants that make the neighborhood more appealing. Maybe it's got really good school ratings, or conversely, you can depreciate or have negative appreciation if, let's say, crime starts to spike in a neighborhood. People don't want to be there. That's going to drive home prices down. So, an example of how appreciation can affect your investment is, let's say the duplex from our first section, that let's say that was purchased for $300,000. Now, let's say that over 6-7 years they opened up some restaurants and shopping and became a very appealing place to live, and then 7 years later you decide you need that money for something else and you're going to sell your investment property, and you're able to sell it for $400,000. So in addition to whatever of your spread that you've been able to capture over those 7 years of owning that property, you now get the net benefit of that additional $100,000 of appreciation that is also going to be money in your pocket, in addition to the fact that the mortgage payments you've been paying over the 7 years, that using the money received from your tenants is paying down the actual principal of the property itself, which will be money that then you will also be able to benefit from. But you really want to try to target a place where you're going to see a lot of positive appreciation, and a bare minimum where you're not going to see depreciation. I think the easiest way to do that is that most home search sites these days, particularly I know they have it on Redfin, they have it on Zillow, where it will give you statistics on what the average home price has done over time. And you might see that in the last 5 years prices have only gone up in this neighborhood. That's usually probably a pretty good sign that trend will probably continue. Now, if they've been flat to fluctuating down, that should be a warning sign that might be an area you might want to think twice about. Not that you go to sell that same duplex from our example that you bought for $300,000, and then you can only get $250,000 for it down the road, and you might even owe the bank more than that, and that would be a negative cash flow situation you wouldn't want to get yourself into. So certainly consider trying to target neighborhoods with positive appreciation, and make sure that's part of what you're looking at when considering purchasing a rental home. So the second piece of this section is the taxes piece. We talked a little bit about taxes when determining what our spread is. Rental income minus your mortgage, taxes, and insurance. Taxes is a piece of that. We know it right up front. They should be able to tell you what the monthly tax rate is, before you even decide to purchase the home. But the one thing that will happen is taxes will change, right? The amount of your tax bill inherently will change, and almost always it's going to go up. More often than not, even if the tax rate doesn't change as far as what percent taxes it's a percent of what the estimated value of your home is. So in general, you bought it in a good neighborhood because of the appreciation aspect we just talked about. The offset to that in the short term is that your taxes will go up every time that they reassess the value of that home. So I'm not saying that you need to be concerned about buying a home where over time taxes are going to go up. That's just going to happen. It's going to be a slight offset to the positive you'll get from a positive appreciation. But you should at least understand in the short term what impact it might have on your spread. So most of the taxes that you pay on property taxes is actually state driven. So you'd have to understand state by state, one, what your tax rate is, but then two, more importantly, how often that they reappraise homes to see their value. So for example, in Illinois, they appraise homes, that's where we live and where our rental properties are. They reappraise homes every 3 years. So what that means is someone literally comes out to your house, looks at it, compares it to sale prices from other homes in the neighborhood going back over the past year, and they decide this is what this house is worth, and we'll take our taxes based on that. Now, on the north side of Chicago, where one of our rental properties is located, homes have been appreciating very quickly. The value of homes on the north side have been going up a lot over the last couple of years. The good side is the appreciation when we eventually go to sell the house, but knowing that we're not going to be doing that anytime soon. The bad side is on our most recent appraisal, which happened just this past year, that goes into effect on tax bills this year, our tax portion of our bank payment or our escrow literally went up over $300 a month. Like that, not a year, but a month. I mean, that is a baffling number to me. So if that was, the example of the duplex that we've been using, where we had $2,000 a month of rental income, $1,600 a month on our costs of mortgage, insurance, and taxes, that $1,600 is now $1,900, and all of a sudden your $400 spread's gone down 75% to $100. You ideally don't want to be in that situation, or you at least need to know it's coming or try to budget for it. And in our example, we had, seeing the appreciation when we had bought this house, we knew we'd expect increasing tax bills over the year, but we also expect that, right, you can get that money back. The theory should be that if the value of the homes in that area are going up so much because people don't live there, the ability to charge more for rent should as well. You just have to understand that you might not get it all back in one chunk, right? And you probably at least have to wait till the next lease before you're going to be able to raise rent if it is justified. So certainly what I would say on the appreciation piece, look at Zillow, look at Redfin. Apps like that would be able to tell you what appreciation neighbors are doing. And on the taxes side, understand when the next appraisals would be and what the current tax rates are, so that you can factor that into your home buying decision. Okay, so the third important thing that you need to think about when purchasing a rental property is, how are you going to manage it? Are you going to act as landlord yourself and manage the property, or are you going to outsource it to a accredited rental property management agency? Now, there's no right answer. Both have their advantages and their disadvantages, and one route might be better than another depending on how much free cash you have laying around, your kind of skill set in terms of being a handy person and managing the property yourself, and how much time you have on your hands. But what we'll do is we'll talk through some of the pros and cons of each. This should hopefully help guide you into which one you think is best. So when we think about acting as landlord ourselves, the obvious number one biggest pro or advantage is the cost. It doesn't cost anything besides your time and effort. Now, there's obviously a value to your time and effort, but from a pure financial aspect, it's free. So that's a big pro. I think the other thing I like to think about as a pro is that you're at the house more often because you're over there dealing with different things. And that allows you to keep a better pulse on the quality and condition of the home and potentially identify issues earlier on, or identify them before they are issues. Whereas when you have a rental property management company managing the property, they might not be going out there as often, or they might be sending out different types of service people depending on the needs. And those people are just there to do one particular job and don't really have the skin in the game like you do, being the owner of the house, wanting to make sure it stays in good condition. All right, well, the cons are, the most obvious con is that it's a fair bit of work, right? You're essentially on call 24/7. If someone calls you with an emergency in the middle of the night, you need to be able to know either how to fix things yourself, or if you don't, who are the right person or the right type of repair person to fix those things and be resourceful in figuring that out. You also need to do the effort to find new tenants if a tenant moves out, or you need to book tenants lease it to tenants for the first time, which means could be showing it to a lot of people before you find that first tenant that wants to sign a lease. As well as you have to draft a lease and understand that. We'll talk a little bit more about understanding the law and how that and leases in the next section, but just know that's more work that would be there. Conversely, when we think about a real estate management company managing your property, the obvious pro is that it's the easy button, right? They should, in theory, be able to keep it pretty hands-off for you, where they're only calling you if a repair or something is over a certain amount of money. They're going to advise you on what comps in the area that they're comparing it to would say that you can rent it for when you're going to lease it. They're going to do the showings, they're going to draft the lease, and they're going to do all of those types of things. So that's obviously a lot of advantages right there. But the obvious con is that it costs money, right? It costs a decent amount of money. Typical fee structures for these companies would be the first month's rent is completely taken by the company as they call it for marketing and finding the tenant. and drafting the lease, etc. So in that first month, you'll still have your mortgage to pay, but you won't get any rental income coming in. Then after that, it's, fees vary, but I'd say typically 8 to 12%, so we can call it 10%. If you're able to keep a particular tenant in there long term, maybe for 10%, that's a pretty awesome deal, and it's worth not having a landlord yourself if they're doing it well. Whereas if it turns out you have a lot of turnover and every other year you're needing to find a new tenant, those 1 month with no rent, they kind of add up, and they're definitely a cost that you'd have to consider. What I would say is, in terms of thinking about a rental property management agency, if you're taking that route, is to do your research. From personal experience, we have a property that is out in the suburb of Aurora. It's about 40 miles from here. Didn't want to have to deal with driving out there all the time, and got a property management group to manage it. Turns out they were pretty bad at what they do. I was constantly having to follow up on things. The tenant somehow got my contact information and would reach out to me directly, which in the end was a good thing. So I found out that they weren't doing, following up timely on requested repairs or these things. And eventually I had to fire them, and now I manage that property myself as well. So go on Google. Google has pretty reliable customer reviews, I found. Go on Yelp. Make sure what you're looking at, that they're getting good reviews and that they have a lot of reviews, so it's not just one or two that could be made up or by the owner of the property management group. And then I would say that's also a good tip from, if you're a landlord yourself, that you don't necessarily always know who's the right type of repair person to contact, or who's good at it, or if they're going to rip you off because you've never done business with them. I've found that rather than even having to reach out to a bunch of people I know to find out who could help with or who's good at a type of repair, that someone's got a 4.7, 4.8, 4.9, or even 4.5 on a Google review with a solid number of reviewers, like 20 or 50 or more, that I've had very positive experiences. And so I would say for that as well, is make sure that when you're looking into repair people and all that, to consider the reviews, because they're smart and they know that it's a word of mouth and a customer service industry, and if they're not giving good customer service and fair pricing, that they might not get as much business. So that's something to think about as well. Finally, the last thing I'll mention, it's kind of an in-between between landlording and having rental property agency, is for when you go to lease the unit, which can be a lot of work, showing it a bunch of times, trying to find someone who's gonna want to rent it, is to use a apartment finder type organization, or some people call them headhunters, but they're essentially people, groups that they will show your place for you. They will find a tenant. They will get it rented out. They will draft the lease, but they are going to then take that 1 month's rent as their typical charge. So what you could do is do that to save all the upfront headaches, but then know that after that you could landlord it and save your 10%. Another thing is that typically they're non-binding or contract, meaning that you could have a bunch of them showing it and it's erased to whoever can fill it. Then they're the ones that get the 1 month's rent payment. So that's, I think, the important things to think about when deciding how to manage, and whether you landlord it yourself or you outsource it to other individuals. It really comes down to just an effort versus cost play. Okay, so the fourth thing to think about when purchasing a rental property is understanding the law and then drafting the appropriate lease. Now, when we talk about understanding the law, there's a lot of different rules and laws that govern tenant rights and landlord obligations. And as I referenced in the intro to this video, is that they vary widely by state, and most of it is state driven. So up front, you're going to need to do some research to make sure that you understand your obligations as a landlord and important steps you'll need to take. Examples of this from my own personal experience is for the city of Chicago. There's a document called the CRLTO, or Chicago Residential Landlord Tenant Ordinance, that largely dictates the relationship and the rules around landlord and tenant engagements. And some examples from that of things you would need to know is that if you take a damage deposit, for example, when a tenant moves in, that you are obligated to pay a set interest rate each year on the renewal of that lease to the tenant. And so it doesn't sound like that big of a deal, right? The interest rate is kind of a standard bank interest rate. So let's say you had a $1,800 damage deposit. It's going to equate to something like 27 cents. But the reason it's important to know to do that is that the law also says that if you fail to do that, the tenant is entitled to essentially twice the damage deposit. So in other words, you forget to do that, your tenant gets a lawyer, they contact you and say, hey, you owe them $3,600 or twice the damage deposit because you forgot to give me my 27 cents interest on my security deposit this year. There's also, in the Chicago CRLTO, a lot of rules around how you evict someone. For example, you basically need a lawyer and have to follow the exact process. And when, to think about drafting a lease, there's certain things you have to put in that lease that we'll talk about in a second. Another example would be from our property in Aurora, Illinois. There, one of the unique things set by that city is that you essentially need to have a landlord rental license. And it's not that hard to get, but you need to get one and have it updated every year. And essentially what it is it's going to be an Aurora inspector each year going through the unit to make sure that it's a safe and habitable place for the tenant to live, as well as, they'll want to see a copy of a background check and the lease, to make sure that they meet the qualifications to be a renter in that city. So there's a couple of examples of why you need to understand what the law is in your state or city to make sure that you are complying with it. What I would say is you can figure out most of this stuff through Google research. If you just Google like Illinois landlord obligations, you'll be redirected to the CRLTO in a lot of different ways, so you can read up that way, or consult with a lawyer. Typically, they'll call themselves a landlord tenant lawyer is the type of person who specifies in these things, and they'll be able to direct you to exactly the key things you need to be doing. They'll be able to help you draft a lease or even provide a stock template for one. Obviously, the downside is reaching out to a lawyer directly is typically that will cost money versus Google research being free. So then when we talk about drafting the appropriate lease document, a lot of what's going to kind of direct you in terms of making sure the right lease document is that understanding of the law. For example, in the city of Chicago, you're required to have disclosures on if there's lead-based paint, documentation on essentially bed bugs, and some other pieces that are a requirement of any lease. So if I went to Google and try to find a template for a lease in Chicago, the first couple of pages might be different in terms of how they draft up the sections and clauses around rent and other things, but they'll be followed by about 22 pages of required documents. If they don't have those, you're technically once again in violation of the CRLTO. So there's a lot of good lease template sites out there. The disclaimer is how do you know if the one you're looking at is truly legitimate or it is truly accredited or the right lease versus just something that might be outdated from 8 or 9 years ago. I'd say cross-reference it with a lot of research. And the end-all be-all to make sure that you got the right thing is to have a landlord-tenant lawyer look at it. I know when we drafted our first lease in Chicago, since I know the rules here are very particular, and I had drafted my own rider of additional rules and expectations of tenants that I wanted to attach to more of a standard lease. I did have a landlord tenant lawyer look at it to provide some feedback and take that one-time cost to make sure that I was setting myself up for success. So moral of the story is on either of these topics, law or leases, the best thing you can do once again is Google research. If in doubt, contact a landlord-tenant lawyer so that whether it be that you are acting in a way compliant with the law or that you have the appropriate lease document for your rental property, that you can feel comfortable on both of those. Okay, the fifth and final thing to think about when purchasing a rental property is free cash flow and the value of holding a rental property long term. So in the first section, we talked about how to calculate the spread, being taking your monthly rental income less the cost of mortgage, taxes, and insurance. To get from the spread to free cash flow, we have to add a fourth expense, which is your unexpected expenditures such as repairs, out-of-pocket costs, or the cost of having a vacancy with no tenant for several months. And then, so if you take essentially your rental income less the mortgage, taxes, insurance, and unexpected expenses, you get to your cash flow. Obviously, the more positive, the better, because at the end of the day, one of the main ways that your property becomes a sound investment is that you have a positive free cash flow that you're able to use on other things in your life or invest elsewhere. In the first section, I also talked a little bit about how up front in our example, we have a $400 spread. You really don't want to just start pocketing that right away. You want to save that in a bank account, let it build up to help cover unexpected expenses that might come up, such as an example with a $5,000 damage cost. We're at the $400 per month spread. It was going to take about 13 months to pay off, which is a long time before we start getting back to a positive cash flow situation. So when we think about, though, the benefits of holding a property long term, in theory, you're going to have hopefully a fixed rate mortgage, 30 or 15-year fixed, where your mortgage cost isn't going to change. Your insurance will go up slowly over time, but I think that's a smaller portion of the considerations. And taxes will also probably go up over time, but typically those two variable pieces will not go up as quickly as your ability to charge more for rent and increase your spread. So what that means is, let's say in that example where we have a $400 a month spread initially on that rental property, then let's say a decade from now, over time, you've slowly been able to increase the amount you're charging for rent, just because either hopefully you have a good appreciation situation in your neighborhood, and the fact of inflation rates tend to just drive higher rent over time, that you've gotten to the point where now for your 2 units you're charging $1,400 a month each instead of $1,000. What that means then is your spread is now increased over time from $400 a month to $1,200 a month. Then in that same situation, or that example where we say we had a $5,000 damage repair cost unexpectedly, now instead of 13 months to cover it out of your spread, it's actually only taking you just over 4 months. In this type of scenario, you're probably able to get to a spot where you have enough money built up pretty quickly, and every time something comes out of it, build it right back up pretty quickly on that $1,200 a month spread, that you're going to be to the point where you're going to feel comfortable, maybe more regularly, taking some of that spread out and considering it free cash flow and using it in other places in your life. So, really that is one of the benefits of the longer you hold the property, that over time your ability to charge more for rent will more than likely increase your spread and give you an opportunity to have cash left over after things like your unexpected expenses, in addition to your taxes, mortgage, and insurance. The other way that you get a better return on your investment, besides just the increasing probability of free cash flow over time, is the value of the fact that, let's say you bought that duplex that we use in the example, and you bought it on a 30-year fixed, you paid 20% down, which is pretty standard, sometimes 25, since it's an investment property if you're not going to live in it, and you hold it 10 years. Over that 10 years, you're using someone else's rent to essentially pay down your principal. So you get your spread over here, your $400 up front, but then some chunk of the principal is going down over here, so that if you're able to sell that house later, either for the same price or more, you're going to get more of the actual value of the home back, that you don't have to turn around and pay back the bank, right? So the longer you hold the house, the more and more of your money is going towards principal rather than interest, which is the piece when you sell the house you get back. So the longer you hold the house from that perspective, that can also be another great way to get a return on your investment. That when you actually sell it, you had originally put in 20% cash or whatever it was in your down payment, and now let's say you actually held it 20 years, and you're actually getting out, instead of 20% of the home's value that you put down originally, something more like 50, 60, 70%. And then that's cash. That's a great, return on your investment in one lump sum at the end that you can use, elsewhere in your life. So hopefully that helps you understand a little bit why free cash flow is important, and that the value of your investment and the likelihood of a solid return on your investment will only increase over time. All right, it's time to wrap things up. So just to recap, the top 5 things to think about when purchasing a rental property are understanding the spread, the effect of appreciation and taxes on your investment, determining how you're going to manage the property, understanding law and leases, and finally, considerations around free cash flow. So, like I said in the intro to this video, I do really believe that if you can figure out those 5 things, have a solid game plan against those 5 things, and are in it to win it in terms of the time and dedication it's going to take to be in it for the long haul, that you have a very good chance at being a successful property management owner. Certainly, if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to respond to any email inquiries. I'll flash the email address right here on the screen, so don't hesitate to email me with any further questions you might have. Thanks a lot and have a great day.